Mr.
You see,
Mukherjee.
I'll tell you. I think the first big credit goes to the NDA-1 government, which thought of the task force and the Vijay Kelkar committee. Then Mr. Chidambaram announced it in 2006. Pranab Babu actually introduced the amendment. And finally, Yashwant Sinha came out with a report in the standing committee, which I think is a good report. Then you had consensus building being done by various chairpersons of the State Finance Minister's Empowered Committee. And I think at the end of the day, every political party in Parliament supported it. Every state government has supported it. Now, the Tamil Nadu government had some reservations at the time of the Constitution Amendment. They had walked out, ADMK. But once it became a reality, they actively participated in the GST Council and became partners in this whole process. Jammu and Kashmir, still not passed GST for the state, but actively participated.
Yes.
So frankly, there is nobody to whom I can deny this
Credit at all.
the credit. After all, if you have, let's say, 5 finance ministers come together and stop a particular proposal, then decision making in the council will become difficult. Nobody's done that till date.
So once the GST is rolled out and once that mega announcement has been made, what is your state of mind today? Is it fatigued? Is it relieved? Are you anxious with what awaits India?
No, you see, I've always used this phrase that in economic planning and reforms, there is never a finishing line. You have to think of the future steps. And in the context of the GST, I think we'll have to be very alert. The GST Council is an elected body.
That's right.
It is assisted by a group of very competent bureaucrats and professionals. So we'll have to see where is the shoe pinching.
That's right.
Is it pinching some particular trade, or is some trade going to suffer because of this? Then we'll look at that trade, and then once we look at it, we'll try and rectify that error. We are looking at it with an open mind. We don't want any industry or trade in particular to suffer. And I think we are ready for any glitches in a new system. In a transformation of this kind, some glitches are bound to occur.
Yes.
And therefore, I think the next few days will be fairly smooth, because registration will go on. IGST will start being collected.
That's right,
That's
yeah.
already started since morning. And I think the next stage will be, once the system of the GSTN is in place and people start filing their returns for the first 1 month, the second month and third month, and then the system will be almost on a self-auto.
So, you know, I think you're cueing me to my next question. You've answered what we envisage over the next few days. What I'm asking you is, in a policy change of this kind, where, you know, the entire taxation system is undergoing a change, what are the possible glitches that you're budgeting for? What can go wrong? What should India be prepared to embrace?
You see, what can go wrong is, one, will there be technology glitches? Some could be, but they are all rectifiable. We've tried to play it safe that there is no great inflationary impact.
Exactly. Yes.
We've tried to play it safe. And if we have to do some convergence of rates, we'll do it only on a future rate. We don't want to take the inflation risk on day one. Is there any segment of trade or any vulnerable segment of the society which is being hurt? And therefore, we have to look at that particular segment. I think the whole council has been approaching it with a very open mind, that if you go wrong somewhere, you immediately rectify the error.
Fair point indeed. What will you attribute to some of these protests out there in the streets? What do you attribute this anger to? Is this fear of the unknown?
First of all, I think there's a huge reception. There's a
There
huge
is, yes,
relief.
absolutely. I mean, I was out myself.
There is a small protest.
Yes.
And I attribute it to many factors, which eventually boils down to one. Now, take the case of Tamil Nadu. The Tamil Nadu government protested and said, why have you put 28% on cinema halls? The weighted national average of entertainment tax is 29.1.
That's right. Not higher.
Till yesterday. It was higher. In fact, we had reduced it. So we were sensitive. We said, all right, for smaller theatres, etc., which are single plexes, 100 rupees. 100 rupees or less, we'll make it 18. Having got us to reduce the rates, they imposed their own municipal tax.
Yes,
so why the protest? Now the answer is very clear. Now take example 2. When I put 1% duty on gold, excise duty, there was a nationwide protest.
That's right, yes.
When GST is now 3%, the industry has welcomed it. Because the gold industry had thought that they will exist outside the system.
That's right.
Once they've come into the system, it's the consumer who's paying.
Yes, yes.
The tax is paid by the consumer. It's not paid by the manufacturer or the trader. He has to pass the burden. So why is he worried? He is worried. Let us say the textile man says, I have a fundamental right that I should never be taxed. Now this is an impossible argument to accept. Why should costlier garments and costlier clothes not pay?
Absolutely.
And if you don't pay, then I have to charge that amount from some other industry. In any case, if there is, a lot of what the textiles have to pay will be adjusted in the input credit. But if something extra is leviable, it will be passed on to the consumer. The trader is not going to pay out of his profits.
So some of this protest is unfounded.
No. The protest is, once I am within the system, the volume of my transaction is known. And once the volume of the transaction is known, even if the GST burden doesn't fall on me, the income tax burden will fall on me.
Yes.
And therefore, we have lived a normal system where I don't pay indirect tax and therefore I don't pay direct tax.
Yes.
And now that my indirect tax liability will may not go up, but it will come within the system, so my direct tax liability will go up. Hence, let me try and protest. But this is not a government which is going to be cowed down by a protest. After all, we are being dictated by logic. After all, there are 31 state governments and there are 32 members of the GST Council who decide this. And you decide on a particular logic. The logic can't be that somebody says, I have a right not to pay tax.
No, and it's time that India's tax to GDP ratio does go up from where it presently is. I will speak to you about the growth prospects, sir. The last quarter of last financial year, we ended at 6.1%. Various reasons for that. Demonetization also did play a part. How will you think GST will impact growth in this quarter?
See, I'll tell you, we'll have to see in the next first 2 or 3 months how the taxation figures move up. They're just switching over to a new system.
Precisely.
My own view is that eventually the number of assessees under the GST will become significantly more than the assessees under the old system. Because detections are going to be better, it's a more efficient tax system. And in the medium and the long term, the tax collections will go up. Once tax collections go up, there are two impacts. One, the size of your formal economy increases, and two, the public spending itself increases, both at the center and the states. And when the public spending increases, it certainly has an impact on your growth.
Fair point indeed. But sir, I'm going to put forward a point that some of your detractors say. They say because it is a little compromised GST and not the utopian GST, which is in any case never going to be possible.
All right, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Tell me the basic compromise.
No,
I'll tell you. What is being misunderstood as a compromise is...
But I think political compromises have to be made.
No,
you have to think about the poor.
There is no political compromise. I'll make it clear. There are two comments which are made. Why have multiple rates?
Yeah, the multifarious rates is it leading
to multiple rates is this thing. In India, you will always have multiple rates.
Exactly.
A single rate, in this case, if we had put one single rate to be revenue neutral, it would be between 15 to 16%. Now, if we had put a single rate 15 to 16%, some columnists may have said, very good, it's a very simple tax structure.
But you have people to take care of.
So the people who are paying 0 for food, those who are paying 5% for the Aam Aadmi commodities, will all move up to that 15% bracket. It's going to be completely insensitive. Western societies have a single rate because they don't have a BPL population.
Precisely.
When you have BPL and low income populations, you will have to have a large number of commodities which are completely tax-free or marginally tax-free. Eventually, what could happen is two things. The 12% and the 18% standard rate could converge into one.
Okay.
And some items from the 28% category, as the base increases, can move down. Into that that particular single rate. But you will always have multiple rate. And secondly, I've repeatedly said, since indirect taxes are regressive, the poor and the same rich
Everybody
pay the
pays
same,
alike, yes,
pays the same, whether it's for soap or for toothpaste. Then the poor man's commodities have to be untaxed or marginally taxed.
Precisely.
The rich man can be taxed more. And my favorite example, I've been repeating it ad nauseum, that why should a Hawaii chappal and a Mercedes car be taxed at the same rate?
No,
so the single tax theory
Right.
is insensitive to the poor of India. Those who haven't seen poverty or don't know the plight of the poor people come out with this bizarre suggestion because it's a sound good suggestion.
I'm so glad you're not pandering to India Inc. or to the economists on this, because this is utopian to talk about. It's never going to be possible,
Well,
and you have to be sensitive.
I'll tell you, the second important the fact which they say compromise, which was always in the bill, it was including in Pranab Babu's bill, there are 3 or 4 items which are outside the GST.
I was going to come to that.
And there are 3 or 4 items. These were deal breakers. So if the Congress party says that why not have petroleum, please ask the Congress party state governments to agree to petroleum. In the next meeting, I will get all BJP governments to agree to petroleum.
So let me ask you a question.
No, therefore, the state governments would not agree. Now, what have we done? We've first started pushing the case once GST is implemented, and it's an evolutionary process.
Let them test it. Let them taste it.
Once they taste the advantages, real estate, a big source of black money and tax evasion.
Yes.
Some state governments are already advocating what I call is the Arvind Subramaniam theory.
That's right.
Bring
real estate.
real estate in.
Yes.
Delhi government, Manish Sisodiya is a strong supporter. There are some other state governments which are strong supporters. I am a strong supporter. So the GST Council decided in the very first year we will take it up.
Okay.
On petroleum, what I did was that I amended the constitution to bring petroleum into the GST, but kept it zero taxed. And a tax can be imposed once you find, once the council agrees. And having tasted the GST, they are going to realize petroleum products have inputs, but no output credit.
Indeed.
So it will be always beneficial to the consumer that you bring petroleum into the GST.
No, I think you've taken a very pragmatic approach. You've left electricity, petroleum and real estate out, and you will go to those things. When do you see that happen? I know real estate is on top of your mind. You would want to crack down on black money.
I'll keep my fingers crossed. It will depend on the attitude and I would say the statesmanship of the states. And I can tell you, and here I am not speaking for only a BJP or an NDA state. I am speaking for all the 29 states and union territories. I can say with a reasonable amount of certainty and confidence, within the council, no state has played unfairly. They've been very fair, they've been more than fair, and any politics is outside the council. Even yesterday, when the GST was launched and some people said we won't attend,
the states have been a part
the finance ministers all came to the council meeting and were all a party of the unanimous consensus even yesterday.
I think you sometimes say this is political maturity versus political optics. But sir, you are right that, you know, when the proof of the pudding will be tasted by these states, they will perhaps come more on board. But do you have a roadmap in mind? Your chief economic advisor says there should be 3 days. I mean, let's just put this debate to rest. Is there a roadmap you have in mind to simplify?
This is the art of the possible.
Exactly.
This is not something that you can predict. This is not an astrological matter.
Precisely.
Now look at the debate in J&K. Finally, it has become consumers versus the separatists.
Yes.
The separatists say, don't integrate. The consumer says, why should I pay more? And I'm sure in consumer versus the separatists, the consumer is going to win.
And hopefully it should win. We should all keep our fingers crossed for that. Sir, the one thing that markets are a little worried about is that the potential revenue loss on account of the GST, and now that you've made a commitment to compensate the states, are there any back of the envelope calculations?
I'll tell you,
is it a concern at all?
We have already agreed to a mechanism of revenue
where you're going to generate it from within.
From within itself. And therefore, I think giving comfort to the states and generating the revenue from within the GST, some will call it a compromise, and I think it's a very competent, it's a very smart decision which has been taken, which helps us both ways.
One of the things that you said when I asked you the question that what can go wrong and what are some of the things that you should be watching out against, you said, you know, a possible inflationary impact, if at all, to begin with. Urjit Patel was also present at that mega launch yesterday. Let's ask a question that addresses to him. And your Revenue Secretary has spoken to us, and so has the Chief Economic Advisor. How concerned are you about the short-term inflationary impact? Long-term, of course, it's going to be non-inflationary.
You see, I called most of the consumer companies 2 days ago, and I had a meeting with them. Bulk of the items in the CPI basket
are actually exempted.
So it should not add to that. And most of the consumer companies are either trying to, in some commodities, if it moves up marginally, they are absorbing it. In some commodities where it goes down marginally, they are passing the burden, the buck. And therefore, you've seen key sectors like automobiles, etc., where there is going to be a fall. In some food items, there is going to be a fall. In toothpaste and soaps, there is going to be a fall. Medicines will maintain broadly a status quo. And I think when you speak of 28, 18, 12,
right,
nobody speaks of the input credit.
Because that's going to offset a lot of those tax
input
figures.
credit also. So in service tax where it goes up marginally, and I would tell the consumers to be vigilant, because 3% increase should never be 3% increase. It should be 3% minus the input credit. That's the right of the consumers now.
So you're cueing me to my next question, but before I go to that, I must ask you a question on what sort of an impact do you think the GST will have on monetary policy regime? Is this, like Mr. Chidambaram said to us 2 days back, it will add to the voices of the hawks in the Monetary Policy Committee?
I think let us watch the situation. Inflation has been fairly under control.
That's right, yes.
And once the June figures
Well
also
below
come
the
out,
target.
I think it's moving in the right direction. And therefore, I don't think we've taken any such decision in the council which is going to really push up the prices.
One of the things that, and you alluded to this, that people should be vigilant as to what is the tax they're paying, and they should not be paying 3%. It doesn't directly translate into that. I think one of the biggest issues that people have, and while people are embracing the GST, is this anti-profiteering clause. I want to clear the air for once and for all. Is this not anti-market? Is this not anti-competition? Let competition decide the price. Should the government get involved? Because this will lead to discretion.
Even competition has a market regulator.
That's
you see, competition, the market also is capable of throwing up aberrations. And therefore, you keep a deterrent in place. I've always said the deterrent must be transient. It can't be permanent. And the deterrent is better never used. It's only there to make sure that the competition plays its own role. And I personally feel that there would be only in the rarest of rare cases, if at all, a user of this clause. And we'll put in sufficient safeguard mechanisms into it. But then there are commodities which were 31%. And instead of bringing them down to 28, we've brought them down to 18. Now, if there is a fall of this extent,
and that price doesn't come down,
and the price doesn't come down, then the manufacturer must know. For instance, just now, I was told, let us take footwear. Now, footwear which from 29% has become 18 for costlier footwear. Now, 10% is a big fall.
And those prices
and therefore, these days, those costlier ones can cost thousands and thousands of rupees.
That's right.
So, a price fall itself would be 1,000, 1,500 rupees. Now, are you? And there is a second factor. You see, the consumers only remember the VAT because it's additionally mentioned.
True. Yes.
They don't remember the excise because it's embedded in the cost.
Yes, yes. And that's also gone. That's
and now that embedment will have to be taken out. And then the excise will have to be recalculated on excise plus VAT. In that place, what's the GST?
You know, I don't think anybody doubts your intention. I think people laud the fact that you're trying to protect the consumer, you're trying to keep inflation in control. I think what people are worried about is that at your level, when you say it should be used sparingly, it's very good. The harassment could happen at the ground level, at the last
you see, I think you will have a standing committee, then you will have an independent committee.
So chances of misuse are minimized.
We will put in various mechanisms that we don't want to harass, we want to use it more as a deterrent.
But if you see prices go down consistently, are you willing to repeal it, even though I know it's sunset for 2 years?
I have already said that it's a transient clause.
I want to talk about exports before I quickly take up a few questions on politics. Exporters say, and this is one of the concerns that have come in, that they were never asked to pay taxes. Now they have been asked to pay taxes, which will of course be refunded.
You see,
Why
the
do
GST, the GST mechanism is such that it doesn't provide for exemptions. It only provides for refunds. That's how the system is going to work. Even your geography-based investments, the exemptions that you have will work in the same manner. And therefore, as far as exports, etc. are concerned, the refund mechanism is an expeditious mechanism. It's not a mechanism where you have to wait for years together. It's a mechanism which happens in days.
So,
After all that, when you put the whole taxation system on a software, then the refunds also must be generated.
And the lesser the exemptions, the better and smoother the system will be.
Absolutely. And if you have too many exemptions, you'll say it's retrograde.
Exactly. Why was there a need? I mean, I know why there was a need, but do you believe the compulsion was so high that hours before the GST launched, the council, and headed by you, decided to reduce the tax slab for fertilizers, for
I'll tell you the
tractor parts?
reason.
Why so?
I'll tell you the reason. The council has reviewed, at least on, we've received hundreds of representations, about 60 odd we've reconsidered. On fertilizer, the facts which came out on a reconsideration was that if the fertilizer factory is within a state, the tax was about 7.25%. And if there was an interstate fertilizer movement, the existing rate of tax was about 9% plus. So anything between 7.5% to 9.5% is the existing rate. Now fertilizer was something which fell bang in the middle of a 5% and a 12% band.
That's right, yes.
And therefore you could decide either way. We had earlier decided to make it 12. Then a representation came from the state governments. Punjab said, Haryana said, one or two other state governments said that we've actually, to help our farmer, made it zero in our state. At least the VAT part, we made it zero, and the tax was marginal. And then when we calculated, Haryana in particular, supported by many other states, showed, and Haryana was speaking on behalf of Haryana and Punjab, that as of today, the fertilizer price per bag would go up by 31 rupees. Now, the council felt, do we do this at a stage where the farm sector is in a vulnerable condition?
That's right, yeah.
And therefore, balancing the farm equity, we decided not to do it. In the case of tractor parts, we had given a lesser duty on tractor parts. Karnataka brought to note that some of the parts on which we had not given a duty, on the ground that they could be also used for other automobiles, we had actually left out some of the tractor parts which were only specific to tractors and not to other motor vehicles.
Oh, which is why you've...
And therefore, this is an error which needs to be corrected.
Fair point indeed. Bimal Jalan, while congratulating you on 18 audit, say that it's a big, big move. One of the things that he believes that the government needs to do is not be rigid and be agile, which of course you're going to be. How easy will it be for you to be agile? Because every decision will have to be vetted by the council. The council will have to meet to review.
That's correct. But my own experience of the council has been a very positive experience. And we've decided that for the first 3 months, the council will meet on the first Saturday of every month.
So all Saturdays are going to be working.
Yeah, so every Saturday the council is going to meet, and on every first Saturday of every month, and we'll assess how it's moving.
The two big states that have still not embraced the GST, so to say, I mean not embraced but more sulking, is J&K of course will pass. How disappointed are you with the sulking West Bengal?
You see, West Bengal has multiple positions on the GST. They were the biggest supporters that I had outside the NDA of GST.
That's right.
So when the constitution amendment was passed, the loudest support I got was from the Trinamool Congress, and I'm grateful for that.
I think even on her re-election, the first thing that she said was that she's going to support the GST.
Now, West Bengal supported the GST. They supported the constitution amendment in Parliament. They have not approved the constitution amendment in their own state assembly. But because it needed an approval of only 50% of the assemblies, so it worked out. So I thought it's already redundant whether they do it or not. Most of the decisions, they've actively participated, got some changed, participated and supported the GST in the council. They've been a party to the decision. in the last few days, they started championing the cause of postponement. And I don't think there was any ground for postponement.
You can never be ready for a tax reform like this.
You see, a tax reform like this, we didn't have the luxury of time. You have to have an alternate system in place by the 15th of September.
Yes.
And therefore, we are just starting 2.5 months, 75 days before that, so that all the glitches and everything are over by that time.
By that time. I'll ask you, I want to ask you a personal question on the GST, but I'll just ask you, you have ticked off the biggest reform that people have been waiting for a while, which is the GST. In your own words, reform never has a finishing line. And I think what markets are now awaiting, or investors are now awaiting, is what you will do with Air India. You've said to us that there are no two ways in the government, no two ways to think in the government about this. That panel has been now constituted. Is there a time frame that you're working with on Air India?
I'll tell you, privatization of an airline is not an easy job. And fortunately for us, amongst the success stories that we have in India, like pharmaceutical, like IT, like highways, telecom industry, there are several success stories we have. In the last few years, aviation has become a success story. So there's a big private sector competition with Air India. You have good quality airlines. You have good quality airports. Actually, if you go to the Indian airports now, they visually come out, they certainly come out better than the airports in the United States, and probably much better than the airports in Europe. It's only in Korea or Hong Kong or China that you see competitive airports, and we compare with the best in the world now, at least in the major metros. So our airports are improving, our airlines are doing well, and our regional connectivity is doing well. There are not too many countries in the world which will have over 100 airports with commercial flight connections. So we'll have one of the best flight connectivity. Now, therefore, this gives a potential. And you have 4 or 5 functional airlines in India. The private sector airlines are doing extremely well in India. And therefore, I think history has provided us with a second opportunity to privatize Air India. Because if you privatize Air India, you have about 500 to 600 aircrafts operating in India. China has 5,000. So if you look at a 7 to 8%, 9% growth rate, probably 10 years from today, India should have over 2,000 aircraft flying within the country.
They say inshallah.
Now, if you look at the whole pipeline, this is where you
want to get
see down the canal. Now, if that's the desire, and therefore Air India becomes a good product to buy. By anybody in the private sector. Now, how it is to be done, how many players are showing interest, I think is a question which we'll once the GOM is constituted, we'll have to consider that and then decide. Today, the decision is in principle, we decide to privatize this. How we do it, what manner we do it, what are the equity considerations, how do we deal with the debt, what do we do with the immovable property, all that is a matter where specifics will be decided.
Work in progress. But, you know, you've got suitors lined up. Indigo has already formally written to the government saying that they're interested in buying Air India. We're given to understand that the Tata Group is interested as well. Where are talks on?
Well, I would not, and frankly, I am not a privy to any talk outside the system. Once we see the number of people who show interest, we'll finalize our terms and conditions on that basis. Because after all, one has to have a pragmatic approach. And therefore, we'll look at that and then settle the terms.
So let's get back to the success of the GST. What's the best thing you were told on the GST, at home, within the party, by the Prime Minister?
You see, I think we must keep in mind that you have a political leadership in the Prime Minister which, to take this country forward, has a lot of burning desire. And to implement that, there is a lot of fire in the belly. It's not that you have a laid-back approach, all right, the states are not agreeing, so I'm not agreeing, what can I do? You are not coming out with alibis. You are forcing the agenda, you are implementing the agenda. And I can say with certainty that all these steps which we have taken, whether it is Aadhaar or it's insolvency or it's demonetization or it's FDI liberalization or the GST or trying to do away with political corruption, or now this, my suggestion in the budget for cleansing political funding, not one would have been possible by a finance minister unless he has the full support of the government and particularly the Prime Minister. And therefore, here you have a Prime Minister who's been forcing the agenda within the government and outside. And I'm sure that's the correct approach for any leadership to follow.
For somebody who sleeps at 9:30 p.m. most days, how difficult was it to be awake at midnight when it was really a tryst with GST?
No, you see, I normally get up early, I sleep early, but
yes.
I think
Well, it's history
it's
in the
taken a
making.
lot of fatigue out of us.
Thank you very much.